Hello and welcome. I'm Mallika Kapur, Deputy Global Editor of Bloomberg Live, and I am so excited to be your host for the first edition of a series of Bloomberg Sustainable Business briefings we're holding in 2020. Now, of course, we're living in unprecedented times. Our priorities have shifted, and governments, business, and people like you and me, are thinking of new ways we can create a world that is greener, cleaner, and fairer. To do that, we need innovation, which in turn needs dreamers, and it also needs doers. And that leads me to today's theme, which is impact through entrepreneurship. In a few minutes, we'll hear from entrepreneurs who have come up with creative solutions to pressing local problems, sometimes some of the most challenging problems the world is facing. And we'll hear from CEOs of two of the world's largest companies who are helping these smaller businesses, these impact entrepreneurs, achieve scale. We'll get to those conversations in just a minute, but before that, some housekeeping notes I want to go through with you. But right at the start, I'd like to thank our sponsor, EY, for helping make this event possible. And of course, it's a virtual event. We might have some tech issues, so please bear with us if we do experience any of those problems. If you're having trouble with audio or video quality, please refresh your browser. I'm going to be doing the same if I struggle with that. You can restore windows using the buttons at the bottom of your screen. And remember that the size of each window is adjustable. Social media. We are going to be on social media, and we'd really love you to engage with us. Use the hashtag #SustainableBizSummit. And with that, I'd like to introduce our first guests. Carmine, the Sibio Global Chairman and CEO of EY, and Alan Jope, the CEO of Unilever. Gentlemen, welcome. Alan, you said 10 years ago you wanted Unilever to become the world's most sustainable business. That's a pretty ambitious target. 10 years on, I want to ask you, how do you think your company is doing? And honestly, what's worked?
100 years ago, one of the founders of the company, William Lever, said that he wanted to make cleanliness commonplace and lessen the load for women. And so I think we've been conscious of our social and environmental responsibilities for a long time. 10 years ago, my predecessor put in place some very ambitious goals around decoupling growth from our environmental impact, creating health and well-being more widely, and in particular, inclusive growth, especially opportunities for women and smallholder farmers. I would say 10 years on, let me just put the headline, which is GlobeScan do a survey that measures how businesses are perceived by opinion leaders in the sustainability space. And we're very proud that Unilever's topped that for the last 10 years. One area that's been particularly difficult is, for example, when we look at our carbon footprint, we've done a terrific job improving our carbon footprint within our operations. Our water footprint, we have no waste going to landfill now. However, our scope 3 emissions, where we're relying on grid change and the use of renewable energy for people to wash their hair or wash their bodies or cook their clothes, has driven home to us how important it is to work on the system and not just in the system.
Carmine, I want to come to you next. And it's almost a given now that for a big business to be successful, you have to serve multiple stakeholders, shareholders, clients, employees. I'm curious, has the pandemic made you rethink that? Is it now a case of saying, well, our employees have to come first? How are you rethinking serving multiple stakeholders?
Mallika, thanks, and it's great to be here. The pandemic has not changed our mission in terms of multiple stakeholders, in terms of what a company should be doing for clients, for people, and for society in general. So that's continued. I would say a couple of things, though, that have come out of the pandemic. The question around income inequality is a question that's coming out because of the pandemic. It was always there. But even during the pandemic, employment for higher wage earners is only down 0.5%. Employment for low wage workers is down 16%. And that says a lot. And that's something that we have to address going forward. It's a topic that was an issue before the pandemic. The pandemic has actually brought it more to light than ever before. And the other issue that was there before the pandemic that's getting a lot of conversation now again is sustainability, and what are companies doing, to Alan's point, what he's doing at Unilever. But that is a conversation that's taking place with all CEOs. So at EY, Mallika, we're focused on all the above. First of all, our people. We obviously protected our people during the pandemic. We made sure that they were safe. We put in travel restrictions right at the very beginning, and most of our people have been working from home. We're just getting some people back to the office now, which has been important. We've also protected jobs around the world. We had 15,000 interns, lived up to all our numbers in terms of the commitments that we had made before the pandemic, and protected jobs really around the world. And obviously, I think that's incredibly important. We've helped our clients get through the pandemic. We did a lot of work around supply chains and around really making sure that our clients can operate digitally. That's something that the pandemic has really sped up. And then around society, we're doing so much around society at EY, and we continue to do it. Obviously, during the pandemic, a lot of our people helped frontline workers, did a lot of modeling for companies in terms of what they needed in terms of equipment. And then also we're very involved in terms of really creating more and more jobs around the world and in particular cities. Jobs jobs that you don't need 4-year degrees and you don't need university degrees, but jobs that you can be trained, in particular in technology, and then companies would hire you. That's incredibly important to help on the income inequality piece.
Income inequality, that's definitely something the pandemic has exposed and shown the fault lines around the world, which brings me to a point, Alan, that you made when you spoke to a colleague of mine at Bloomberg back in May. You said what you were really worried about was what was going to happen in the slums of India, the refugee camps of the Middle East, the shanty towns of Africa. What's your outlook now about these regions, these developing markets, and are these markets best served by big businesses, companies like yours, or are these the markets that are usually better served by impact entrepreneurs and small businesses?
Well, look, I still feel that the heaviest impact will be seen in, as Carmine said, those who are less well off. Right now, the only major country in the world that is still seeing exponential growth in the disease progression is India. The 7-day moving average is over 70,000 new infections a day. And we've seen less severe impacts in Africa than we feared, very strong impacts in Latin America and in India, and more or less East Asia has done a good job of containing and responding. Now, as to your question on who's best placed to serve these people, I don't think we should have an either-or mindset. Big companies like Unilever or EY can bring know-how and scale and do good at scale. And I think we've got many examples of how we've done that, including our hand washing initiatives. We've now trained over 1 billion people on proper hand washing. And until we have a vaccine, social distancing and good hygiene remain the best protection that we can find. But isn't it fantastic when we see these smaller entrepreneurial businesses working on the front lines of need and serving the societies and communities that they operate in? And so we can only applaud, support, and partner with these impact entrepreneurs who do so much good.
Carmine, you, like Alan, work a lot with smaller businesses and with impact entrepreneurs. Do you have an example of a particular business that you've seen, scale up from a very small level to a level where it's really achieved impact on a global scale? Is there one or two examples you'd like to share with us?
Sure, Mallika. So I'll give you 2 examples. One is our winner of our World Entrepreneur of the Year this year, Dr. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw. She started a company called Biocon in India, and she's providing really blockbuster drugs to benefit many, many patients. And That started as a very small company with only $500 back in the early 80s, and now is a multi-billion-dollar, 11,000 people company. And so that's a great example of a company with a purpose, doing well for people, and obviously doing well from a shareholder perspective as well. But probably the one that's well known is Eric Young at Zoom. Zoom was also one of our regional winners in our World Entrepreneur of the Year awards going back a few years. But if you think about what Zoom has done, started as a very small company, and now it's it's a verb as well, and doing phenomenally well in the market. And frankly, these convening technologies without them, this pandemic would have been a lot worse from a business perspective. And it's really impacted all of us for the good during the pandemic.
Well, not just from a business perspective, like you said, Zoom has become a verb. We're all zooming our way through our daily lives, homeschooling, for example, everything. You talked about Biocon, being a company with a purpose. And this is a question for both of you. Maybe, Carmine, you address it first. The debate between profit versus purpose, it's not new. But I want to hear your thoughts about how you sort of balance the two. What are some of the metrics you look at when you decide whether to put profit first or purpose first? And of course, has the pandemic made you rethink that? Carmine?
Yeah, so on this, the pandemic has not made us rethink it at all. At EY, we have a purpose. It's building a better working world. That guides us in terms of everything we do. And what we measure, we call it our ambition, but we have a 10-point measurement system for all our leaders. And that includes, that obviously includes financial metrics, but it includes everything around long-term value. So societal, including sustainability, people, everything we're doing with people, and obviously clients. So it's a balanced type approach in terms of how we're looking at this. And that has not changed in terms of the pandemic. In fact, I would say today, most of our clients operate with a purpose. I think if you don't have a purpose today and you don't really live your purpose, I don't think many young people would want to work at the company, period. And that's something that I think some of our clients are slower to capture, but many of them are capturing it. And I actually think the pandemic has strengthened that feeling.
That's what I suspected, that the pandemic has made us all want to live our lives with a little bit more purpose. Alan, I want to hear your take. And as Carmine said, especially the younger generation now, right? They don't want to work for companies that aren't seeking purpose. And you have to be a lot more transparent because of social media, much more answerable. So your take on whether the pandemic has made you refocus on purpose.
Mallika, I have so much to say on this, I'll have to contain myself. The cost of funding the gap that we have to the Sustainable Development Goals is about $6 trillion. All the philanthropic foundations in the world have a budget of about $2 trillion. The entire US government spending is $4 trillion. It is going to require mobilization of the private sector to ensure that we have a fair and sustainable world. The biggest change that needs to happen in this private sector is to abandon the ridiculous notion that it's a trade-off between purpose or profit. By running your business with a sense of purpose, by being responsible to the environment, by being responsible to your employees, by being responsible to society, is a pathway to superior financial returns. And I think more and more investors, more and more economists are understanding this. We're clear on the business case for sustainability and purpose in Unilever. It drives better growth, it saves cost, it spurs innovation, it reduces risk, but most of all, it's a magnet for talent. And one of the enduring impacts that we're seeing from COVID is consumers are shifting their spending towards brands and companies that operate with responsibility. We can measure that right away. So please join us in trying to eliminate this idea that there's a trade-off between purpose and profits. Purpose is the pathway to better financial performance.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to talk to you about your sustainable living brands. You have a number of brands within your portfolio that have been declared as sustainable living brands, and that includes household names like Dove, for example. And this surprised me that these brands grew 70% faster than the rest of your brands in 2018. And I'm curious, are you giving a message to consumers that because this is a sustainable brand, you should be buying this? Or are you taking your lead from consumers? Which way does it work?
Well, that's a very good chicken and egg question. It's certainly true, and that pattern is sustained, that our sustainable living brands are growing faster than the rest of the portfolio. They now represent just over half the portfolio. I think we're doing what good consumer products companies do. We're responding to changes in demand pattern, changes in consumer wishes and desires. What we see is different cohorts with different reactions. So baby boomers and Gen X don't really change their behavior around sustainable dimensions. We notice that millennials are preferentially choosing brands that clearly do something positive for society, the environment, and their younger cohort, the Gen Zennials, it really is the only thing that's driving brand preference. So this is quite simply about building a stronger business for the future. When our brands conduct themselves in a responsible manner, they remain relevant for the younger consumers that will be the bulk of the population tomorrow.
Carmine, you coach impact entrepreneurs and small businesses all around the world, and they come to you for your expertise and for advice on how to scale. They have a lot to learn from you. What has big business learned from them, from small entrepreneurs?
Well, that's a good question, Mallika. And we do a lot of convening in terms of small entrepreneurs with big companies, and they each help each other out. And a lot of our clients, a lot of our large clients, learn in terms of being agile, being innovative. In a lot of large companies, it's hard to be innovative and agile, and that's something that everyone is trying to do more of at large companies. But there's a lot to learn from smaller companies and entrepreneurs, and we try to bring those groups together. We have an Innovation Realize session, that we're going to have virtual going forward, but we had physically twice a year, where we bring those two groups together. And during our World Entrepreneur of the Year process, which starts at the regional level and then the country level and so forth, we really do team up large companies with smaller entrepreneurs to help them really scale. One of the things today is, scaling is critical. It's critical to many businesses, including new startups. And obviously, it's a lot easier with technology to scale in terms of clients, but it's not so easy to scale in terms of supply chain. And today, a lot of conversations and a lot of help comes with developing the right type of supply chains. That's a lot. We're doing a lot of work around supply chains, both with young startup companies as well as with well-established companies.
Supply chains. Now, we know that supply chains around the world have been broken, and many traditional supply chain routes have been pretty much turned on their heads because of the pandemic. There is now quite a bit of a focus on an emphasis on local for local, which on the flip side, that can be quite worrying because it could lead to overdependence on, very few producers in a region or just a very limited region. Is that not a cause for concern? Carmine, I'll let you take that first, and then Alan, I'd love you to weigh in on that as well.
You bet.
Yeah, Mallika, it is a cause for concern. I think we all woke up to this idea that having a supply chain in one place in one country is a risky proposition. It took some geopolitical tensions and now the pandemic and so forth to have people realize that. But that is something that we are working with many of our clients to have much more flexibility around their supply chains and much more diversification in terms of the supply chain. And some of this is geopolitical risk, in particular with China today. But some of it is just being smart in terms of having options and making sure that your business is sustainable going forward. So there's a lot of work going on, both in terms of de-risking your supply chain from where it is, but also digitizing your supply chain. That's the item that's really come out because of the pandemic. If you can't really operate digitally and so forth, it's very hard to operate during COVID.
Alan, I'd love to hear your take about supply chains and the emphasis on local for local. And one thing you've also talked about is you're kind of worried about an escalation of nationalism as well. And I was wondering if you could address that with this emphasis on everything being local.
Well, the two are obviously very related points. What I can tell you is that Unilever's supply chain has proven to be very resilient through the crisis. And we believe it's precisely because it is a globally interconnected supply chain with multiple points of backup. And it would have been disastrous for us if we had built a local supply chain. Initially, we watched when issues were developing in China and remapped our supply chain for what happened if there would be a major disruption to materials and goods coming out of China. And through the pandemic and continuing to this day, we are delighted that we have a global supply chain, that it is interconnected, and that we have built points of backup. And we'd have been in big trouble if we had just a national supply chain. So that's one dimension of nationalization or nationalism that we think would have been harmful. The second, of course, is the importance of global trade. Global trade has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. And generally is agreed to spur economic growth. And my particular concern is that if we retreat away from global trade, it will have a depressing effect on the global economy. And of course, as we started this conversation, those who suffer most will be those that have least. And so we reject nationalism. We think it's bad for global trade. It's bad for the least well-off in society, and it's actually bad for global supply chains.
You talked about encouraging businesses to go digital, for example, and Carmine, you said that's become a really crucial step. What other ways are you advising businesses to pivot? How important is it for them to be nimble? And also just yourself, have you had to pivot and conduct your own business in a way that you didn't think was possible or imaginable?
Yeah, so Mallika, that's a good question. So when the pandemic hit, or just before the pandemic hit, we had I don't know, about 1,000 people on Microsoft Teams. That's the convening software that we use, and we scaled that up to 300,000 people within weeks. And you know, it's because of that we've been able to communicate and we've been able to operate pretty much seamlessly. So the digital, transformation continues. We at EY, we have platforms, we have technology where we can do audits digitally. We don't have to be there in person. We can, do tax work digitally. And so this has helped a lot. We were already on that, but the pandemic has strengthened that even more, and it's made it even more crucial. So we've experienced a lot of this ourselves, and obviously we're taking clients through this as well. And depending on the sector, some sectors obviously have it easier than other sectors in terms of digitization and where they are, but almost everyone has to be on that path. And so, in many clients that I talk to, they're all going through a transformation. They're all going through, making sure that they're going to be able to operate in a digital environment.
Alan, you remain heavily committed to sustainability. And you recently made another announcement with another pretty impressive target about your goals for 2030. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, we've discovered that putting incredibly ambitious goals out there with, frankly, not always a clue on how we'll deliver them, spurs action and delivers transformational change. So this week we announced that it's kind of burning your bridges in a way. This week we announced that we would replace 100% of the carbon that is sourced from fossil fuels and used in our cleaning products with more naturally and more sustainably derived carbon. We call it the carbon rainbow. So it's things like green carbon from nature. It's things like purple carbon drawn from the air, and gray carbon from recycled waste. And there's plenty of carbon above ground. And so we think it's quite possible that we can reformulate, build new technologies, reformulate all of our products to use chemistries that are better and more sustainable for the world. And we're going to do that by 2030.
Is this the best time to be? Yes, Carmine, yes.
No, I was going to jump in just to emphasize Alan's point. I mean, I do think this is an area that all our clients are focused on, all companies out there are focused on. And I'll give you an example similar to Alan's example in terms of how the pandemic has helped. We spent $1.1 billion in air travel before the pandemic, and that pretty much went down to zero during the pandemic. And you can imagine, for us at EY, our carbon footprint, 85% of our carbon footprint was air travel. Now, going through the pandemic and as we get out of it, we do not plan on spending $1.1 billion in air travel or having our carbon footprint go up to that level again. We're going to find different ways. And yes, we are going to travel and so forth, but we're hoping that we can have that or 2/3 that in a normal environment going forward. And that will be not only obviously expense savings, but that will be a carbon footprint saving as well. We committed to being carbon neutral in 2020. Now, obviously, for us to do that, we have to buy some offsets, but we should be able to reset.
See, responsible business contributing to the bottom line.
Right.
That's right.
Right. Exactly.
Do either of you think business travel will ever go back to the way it was, to the level it was? Or is that going to be like a significant change for big business after this pandemic?
I think anything that implies a binary solution is going to be wrong. I think we will be living in a hybrid world where people will mix their time from working from home, working in collaborative spaces that we used to call offices. I think there'll be a hybrid between some travel to build relationships and co-create, but a lot of connectivity done digitally. And the short answer is no, I don't think any of us want to get back to the levels of travel intensity that we were seeing before the pandemic.
One thing I wanted to talk to you both about. Yes, Carmine.
No, I was just going to say the trip to Asia for a 2-hour meeting from, let's say, New York, that I think that's gone for good.
I personally think that's probably a good thing. It's definitely better for our planet. One area I wanted to talk to you both about, and this is an area that I think impact entrepreneurship can make a huge difference, is gender equality. And this is a well-known saying, of course, that when you empower a woman, you empower not just her family, but her community, a village, town, etc. Tell us about the difference you've seen impact entrepreneurs make to gender equality. And I ask this in the context of the pandemic because we are concerned about the pink collar recession and just how much the pandemic has pushed women and women's participation in the labor force back. Alan, I see you nod, so I'll let you take that first.
Well, look, our model is, we believe, to first get our own house in order. A few years ago, 38% of our management was women. Last year, we crossed 51%. And now we're thinking much about our extended value chain. And I guess the example I would use is in India, which has got a very unusual structure versus China. For example, China is a country of cities, India is a country of villages. And we're achieving deep distribution in the villages of India by setting up women entrepreneurs as micro distributors. And I can tell you the transformation in their lives from having some financial independence is absolutely sensational. And as you already pointed out, we know that when women are financially liberated, the money goes into the community to a far greater extent than for men. So now we're looking at things like smallholder farmers on the other end of our supply chain, where we've got lots of women smallholder farmers, and creating entrepreneurial activity that women can participate in our extended value chain. And then the final point is using our brands as a platform to unstereotype the advertising landscape. So for instance, when you see someone being cast in a leadership position in advertising, guess what? It's usually a man. And so we're trying to make sure that we unstereotype the advertising landscape to be far more inclusive of gender, of race, of people with disabilities. And interestingly, the more we do that, the more effective our brand communication is. So those are some of the things that we think we can do.
Absolutely. Carmine, I'm curious, your take on this, because the pandemic is pushing women's participation in the labor force back by a number of decades. What can big business, what can EY do to help reverse that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I guess I'll start with our own house, the way Alan started. We actually just announced our new partner promotion globally. We promoted 600 or so partners, and 33% of them are women. Now, you'd want a number like 50% to Alan's point, but that is a big increase, 33% versus what we've had in the past, which has been more in the mid-20s. So we are making more and more progress. Our management board is 40% women. We have a woman who leads the Americas and the U.S. At EY, Kelly Greer. We have a woman who leads Europe, Julie Tieglin. So we've made a lot of progress on gender. I think from a D&I perspective, there's more progress to be made in terms of people of color, and that's something that we're working on with everything going on today. But if we go back to gender, first of all, Dr. Kiran Mazumdar that I mentioned before, that is a woman, by the way, who won our World Entrepreneur of the Year and created a fantastic company. And when we do look at entrepreneurs, we are also around the world helping women entrepreneurs in particular, so that they can, because when we do this program, there was an issue in terms of gender. We were not getting enough women entrepreneurs into our program and into our ecosystem. So that's been a major focus going forward. We're basically doubling the amount of women that are involved, but that's still small numbers. So there's more work to be done there. And I do think the pandemic has hurt in terms of gender. Sorry?
Yeah, I was saying that's the first step, is to give them access, right? Is to have them be able to approach a company like EY or to get that help. Because very often, not allowed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Getting access and becoming part of an ecosystem is incredibly important. It's the only way that these entrepreneurs can really scale.
And one more theme, and I'm going to let you all go, is the theme about partnership. And when we talk about the UN Sustainable Goals, number 17 is partnerships to achieve the goal. What's the best model? I mean, to achieve those goals, you do need collaboration between multiple partners, governments, the private sector, big business, entrepreneurs. What has worked for you all, or where are the stumbling blocks? Carmine, do you want to take that first? Like the best model for partnership, you think, to achieve sustainable goals?
Sure. And at EY, we're involved in many partnerships. One example would be Transform, that Unilever is involved with as well, in terms of bringing goods and services to sub-Saharan Africa as well as South Asia. But really the trick on partnerships, Mallika, is there's got to be alignment, number one, and there's got to be a win for all parties. And when I see them work well, the win for all parties is very obvious. When I see them don't work well, it's when one of the partners, it could be multiple partners, but if they do not have a clear mission and a clear win for them. So we have many alliances where we do work with companies, we do work with governments, and when there's alignment in terms of where that needs to go and what that needs to be, and we could define a win for all parties, it works pretty well. When there isn't, and that's vague, is when it doesn't work well.
Mm-hmm. Alan, I'm going to let you have the final word.
Well, very quickly, if you look at the big problems in the world, they're mostly derivative of two overarching crises that we have: inequality and climate change and the degradation of nature. None of these are going to be solved by one sector working alone. All the good work that we're able to do is inevitably the result of a partnership, typically between government, the private sector, and civil society. And so program by program, brand by brand, we are realizing the way that Dove impacts girls' self-esteem at scale is through partnership. The way that Lifebuoy affects hand-washing behavior is through partnership. The way that Hellmann's tries to tackle food waste is through partnership. So all progress will ultimately come through multi-sector partnerships. It's central, and it was so wise that it's captured as the 17th Sustainable Development Goal.
Yeah, absolutely. It is all about partnership, and I'm glad that the two of you are in partnership to help chase some of these goals. Alan and Carmine, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mallika.
Thank you, Mallika.
And now I'd like to hand it over to my colleague, Eric Ruston, for his conversations with entrepreneurs who are really doing their best to make a difference to our world. Eric, over to you.
Thanks, Mallika. I'm delighted to be here today to moderate a panel called Entrepreneurs Driving Change at Scale. We have four amazing people here doing great work, using just harnessing the enormous power of the private sector to deliver goods and services to people who need things that in the Western world we too often take for granted. Let me just introduce them right away and we'll get started. Joanna Bichsel is founder and CEO of Kasha. Minhaj Chowdhury, founder and CEO of Drinkwell. Geoff Revell, founder and CEO of HappyTap. And Ivy Russell is founder and CEO of Maya. Ivy, why don't we start with you? I'd like everyone just quickly to give us a taste of the company you founded and a little bit about your kind of superhero origin story. How did the idea come to you, if it came in a eureka moment, or if there was more of an evolution to it?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Eric. And thanks, Bloomberg, for having us and giving us this opportunity. Maya is a mobile-based messaging digital healthcare provider. It works as if your day-to-day well-being assistant that intelligently understands your questions and connects them directly to experts such as doctors and therapists, and then who then provide them, the users, with the advice or the help they're looking for. Maya started with like two personal journeys, as you were saying, Eric, about the superhero moment, or the story behind it is, soon after I gave birth, I went to Bangladesh. I'm originally from Bangladesh. At that time, I used to work in London. My mom had cancer. My mom's name is actually Maya, so the company is named after Maya. But as she was recovering from her breast cancer, she fell into a bit of depression. And I started noticing more and more, like, where do people, particularly women, where they go when they have a very private question to ask, me being just having given birth, about very something personal to my body. And for my mom, who was almost like ashamed of going to see a counselor and asking for help. So as a result, it was like it took a toll on our family. And then I realized that there was a gap in the market where people needed a safe and secure place to ask questions about very private things about their lives and about their physical and mental health condition. So we started a blog. Soon after, it became quite popular, and then we started getting dozens to thousands of questions. And the questions that we were getting were very real life problems. So from that, we felt that there was this gap, and then we pitched this idea. We got funding, and then it started.
Super interesting. Thank you. Geoff, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I'm the founder of HappyTap, which is a social business in Asia. And our product is an affordable portable sink that makes hand washing with soap and water possible wherever needed. And the importance of hand washing is often overlooked. Even long before COVID, it was the best way to prevent a whole lot of different infectious diseases, and now COVID as well. And since the global pandemic, some things have come into stark focus related to hand washing, including the fact that 40% of people in the world don't have a place for hand washing at home. So hand washing could play a massive role in mitigating the current crisis and even preventing the next one. And I guess, this idea about huge potential was what attracted me, what got me into hand washing in the first place. There's enormous potential for public health benefit, but I was frustrated when I learned that collectively we've made very little progress, if any at all, in the last several decades in terms of hand washing. Billions have been spent on promoting hand washing, but that kind of misunderstood the problem, I think. Like, if people just knew about hand washing, then they would do it. But once we realized that wasn't the problem, we started focusing on designing a part of the solution, which is some improved infrastructure as a critical piece of the solution.
Oh, interesting. Thanks, Geoff. Joanna?
Hi, Eric. I'm Joanna Bichsel, and I'm the founder and CEO of Kasha. Kasha is an e-commerce platform for women's health and self-care. And Kasha was built really because, women have so many needs across their stages of life. And very often, especially in emerging markets, it's really difficult to get the products they need. Even though women are very influential consumers, they actually drive 80% of consumer purchases. They're the decision makers for a lot of the health products for the family, yet they're also massively underserved. So Kasha was built so that women across emerging markets in both urban and rural areas, women who are middle income or low income, are able to get the products they need, products like menstrual care, pharmaceuticals, and products for their self-care. And the reason Kasha started was, you often hear talk about how women are so influential and we have to optimize around women. And often when you actually look from a woman's experience, we're actually not optimizing for women. And women are blocked in so many ways. There's so much social stigma in the world. There's so many blockages, especially in areas which are still very traditional. And that, that really frustrated me. And as someone with a tech background, as a software engineer, and when you look at markets, and especially in East Africa, there's such a high mobile phone penetration. And so there's really nothing stopping us from ensuring that women can confidentially order and get the products they need. And so Kasha was started because it's possible, and the time has come, and it has to exist.
Huh. Minhaj?
Thanks so much, Eric. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Drinkwell, and we're basically a technology-driven water services platform that makes it easy for safe water providers to design, build, operate, and maintain water infrastructure. And the journey has definitely been more of an evolution. I'm actually born and raised in Dallas, Texas, but my parents are from Bangladesh. And so growing up every summer, I would go to Bangladesh and very quickly realize that things I took for granted in Texas, like running tap, were actually quite the chore in Dhaka and other areas of Bangladesh. And so that kind of sparked my interest in learning more about why these kinds of basic necessities are so hard to come by in developing countries like Bangladesh. And it started off this journey since college where I really tried to understand the key drivers of why the global water crisis persists. And what I found was that it was really two challenges. One was rooted in technology, where there was just a lot of inappropriate technology that was attempting to solve the water crisis, but just were too difficult to operate locally or too expensive to import, as well as a challenge in service delivery, where you might have had an amazing technology, you might have had a great government model, but just the way in which it was designed to reach the poorest of the poor was just not scalable. And so I started off really trying to more grassroots, have a nonprofit approach, raising money from friends, family to set up water kiosks, but then quickly realized that to really scale and make a difference, you need to work with the government. And that's really where Drinkwell found its mojo, is being able to partner with utilities like Takawasa or Chittagongwasa, which are the two largest utility service providers in Bangladesh, and partner with them as opposed to competing against them by providing what's called a water ATM. So it's for people who live beyond the pipe. So for example, in Dhaka, there's 4 million people who don't actually live in a home with a running tap. And so for these people, they currently have to resort to going to informal water sharks or vendors. And what we do is partner with the utilities to set up a water ATM. It's just like a bank ATM, but instead of getting cash, you get clean water, and it's at a set price. And we've done about, in total, 400 deployments across Bangladesh and India, giving over 330,000 people safe water through this kind of approach.
It's super fascinating. All of the way that you're harnessing technology to deliver on these basic needs. Another interesting part of all of them is they all have a behavioral element. Whether it's Geoff spending a lot on, or not Geoff spending, but campaigns to promote hand washing, spending a lot of money over the years on marketing. It's clear you can't just insert a coin and have people perform the behavior that you're hoping to encourage them to. What kinds of behavioral nudges did you find you had to build into your businesses to get people to adopt these better practices and services? I know, and I'll maybe Geoff, if you want to go first, because I know that you really had to think about that at the forefront of your work.
That's right. Thanks, Eric. Hand washing is above and beyond everything else a behavior that needs to be practiced consistently. In order for that to happen, we've been learning a lot about this, and there's a ton of interesting research about the nudges and the routines and the sequencing of behaviors that ideally make it an effortless, thoughtless habit. When you prepare food, you wash hands. When you use the toilet, you wash hands. And if the friction or the barriers that normally might prevent you from doing it, if you have to walk 100 meters, if you're a nurse in a healthcare facility, and you have to go outside down the stairs to wash hands, we know it just doesn't happen, right? And it doesn't happen for anybody. It needs to be really easy. So there's a reason why a lot of the things to optimize routines in our daily lives, sinks are placed in close proximity with toilets and in food preparation areas like kitchens. We try to recreate that experience with the HappyTap because of its portability and its visual salience. It really stands out brightly in the home. If it's right where you're going to cook, then you can just turn to it and wash. Or if you're a nurse or a student or a doctor, you need to be able to wash right where you are. That's the most convenient place.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that question? Like, have you had to really grapple with the behavioral change that comes along with the delivery of the service?
Yeah, I can take a stab at it in the sense, because while we were designing Maya, we always had to the trust and fear are always going to be there for someone who's sharing so much information about their personal lives as well as personal physical condition. The trust and fear aspect, we sensed it, and it was in their behavior. People are always nervous and vulnerable when asking for help or typing up a question or asking a question. Is it secure? Am I going to be cheated in a way? Is my information safe? Who else is going to find out about me? Sometimes we would even say, when they would listen to a call or messaging, like, can anyone else see me or hear me? People are just always most vulnerable when they're asking for help. We all are. And our job was constantly to hear those cues, to listen to that and make them feel assured. So obviously our technology, our security, all had to be adapted, and we kept this factor, which is still quite unique to Maya, is about the anonymity factor, that any questions you are asking is anonymized, it's end-to-end encrypted, and the experts are only seeing an ID. So that gave them a lot of calmness and surety that, okay, they can ask the most personal question in their lives and feel very secure and safe at the convenience wherever they're messaging from. These were the things we were constantly solving at Maya. And tried to understand how we could do better and better from these cues. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think another.
Joanna, any thoughts?
Sure. With Kasha, we deal a lot with women's health and self-care. And I mean, you'd be surprised in many instances, but women often don't talk to their daughters around menstruation. And so hundreds of millions of girls around the world are really surprised when they first get their periods. And those women grow up and they really have very little knowledge around menstrual care. And that can lead to improper care and infection and a host of other problems as well. And so for us, whether it's menstrual care or contraceptives or just general self-care, there's a lot of an educational component to what Kasha does. And because we serve women across socioeconomic levels, we really need to reach people where they're at and in their most preferred communication mechanism. And so for low-income and rural women, we have Kasha agents that deliver our orders to the last mile, and many of those of our agents are community health volunteers. So they share a lot of health information that's relevant to women. And then even online, we do a lot of blogs, we do a lot of social media, live Instagram. So there's definitely access to information as well as to products.
If I can add, Eric, from Drinkwell's perspective, it's been a very interesting journey from textbook of public health to the realities. So for example, when it comes to clean water, everyone knows the classic drill of using fear and saying, if you don't consume safe water, you'll be at risk for diarrhea, you'll be at risk for cholera and other water-related diseases. And what's interesting is when we first started piloting a more entrepreneur-driven model, where we really outsourced the marketing message to local entrepreneurs who were in the villages, who knew what resonated well, they actually had a very different approach. We found that some of the most highest performing entrepreneurs, who were also female, were actually selling water by actually giving the people the actual outcome of smoother hair when you're actually showering with water that's free of iron relative to more contaminated sources of water. And what we found was that when you actually appeal to more aspirational, immediate value proposition-based aspects, they're willing to pay for something that's actually free. Anyone can go out to any source of water in these villages and collect it at no cost. Why would they be willing to actually pay for something that's rather, in terms of a substitute, free? And it's been very enlightening to see that you can prescribe the technology, you can prescribe how you maintain a water system, but when it comes to how to sell it, it's really the local entrepreneurs who know best.
That is so interesting. I'm really struck by each of these stories and what you've learned, and also how important these lessons are. You know, I mean, feeding your success, but also the lessons you have to, teach to whether it's partner NGOs or partner governments. And I guess I mentioned this at the outset, but it's just so striking that there's so much need in the world for all of these services, and yet the entrepreneurship model that is celebrated, in OECD nations, is more likely to produce apps that nobody needs than clean water or health advice and services. Does that resonate with you? And what impediments did you find in setting up these initiatives? Was it easier than you thought, harder than you thought? Acknowledging that nothing is ever easier than anybody thought.
It was much harder than I ever thought. And that's, I think, you need that. You need that kind of naivety to get started. But I think what I've seen with other entrepreneurs, especially in emerging markets, is the passion and the determination and the grit to ensure that the solution comes to life. And when your solution can actually change the lives of millions of people and also change the way the world operates moving forward systematically, I mean, you're motivated every day to keep pushing forward. But I think just starting a business in an emerging market compared to developed markets is much harder. The investment ecosystem is not there. It's still very much in its infancy. There's many constraints, whether it's supply chain and technology, capacity, education, infrastructure, but these can be overcome, right? And they're overcome for many different solutions, and they can become overcome for solutions that really matter to people's lives as well. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I
think, Joanna, I want to relate to that as well, as Joanna was saying, that obviously setting up a business for the first time, and me not having that experience, because I, coming from a very rigid background of working in finance, it's like everything's kind of set up for you. Understanding the setting up the company, the HR, the legal, everything was very, surprising to me that, it's hard, and it's harder in developing nations. But one of the things that came across quite, again, surprising to me was the unconscious bias that exists amongst us. So how Maya works is kind of like we have an on-demand network of experts who are trained they from any corners of Bangladesh or any corners of our region now, like we've expanded, can just go on the platform and answer any questions that they're getting routed or matched through our AI. But initially, when we were kind of scaling for our experts, the doctors, the mental health, they had this unconscious bias. One of the examples I faced earlier on was when we had a question on like premarital sex. The comment was like, oh, if it was my daughter, I would just really, slap her or something like that. And that kind of took me by surprise and really needed me to kind of change our architecture on training. So we started to build pillars on, unconscious biases or like religious bias or political or everything. So you have to take out of it, because the reason people are coming to Maya, and even like Kasha as well, is because they trust the platform and they want to open up. But then if we have this unconscious bias in us, in terms of judging them, then obviously we lose the trust. So that's kind of one of the things that has been very hard to kind of re-architecture our training modules, and then make sure that only the scientific element and the biological element is there and everything else is taken out of it.
I like what Minhaj said a few minutes back about the consumers, wanting to buy water when learning about the aesthetic improvements, for hair washing and other things. That rings really true. It's something, Eric, like you asking about the differences between an emerging market or a low-income setting versus being an entrepreneur in a relatively wealthy country. A lot of times I'm reminded, like similar with the HappyTap, it's a dead simple product. It's far from an app, and like we can market similarly the way that Minhaj described. Don't wash your hands because otherwise you might get sick, and there are all these benefits and stuff. Really, what motivates consumers about adopting a product like this, it's a host of other things that are more contextualized and can be something like that, like wanting a beautiful thing. And if I'm really honest, if you go to the functional level, HappyTap is kind of a glorified bucket that makes hand washing easy. It seems really far from an app, and yet on the other hand, the whole reason for its existence is developing consumer insights, understanding consumers really closely, and maybe that's no different than what a successful entrepreneur would do in the West anyway.
And Geoff, to be clear, that is HappyTap behind your left shoulder there.
And just in case I need to wash, yeah, that's it.
This is an observation. I'm not sure what the question is, but I'm struck that Maya and Kasha are named after Ivy's mom and Joanna's daughter, I believe, and HappyTap and Drinkwell are both clever, expressive compound nouns, and it made me wonder about something as simple as the name of an organization, what it reveals about the intention of the founder and the maybe I don't know, tone of the organization. Like what is that? Any observations, I guess, to you coming off of that that observation about the names of your organizations.
Yeah, I'd like to hear Minhaj, and yeah, go ahead first. It'll be interesting to hear you guys first.
Sure, thanks, Ivy. So I think with Drinkwell, it's got a double meaning, because on the one hand, you go to a well typically to drink water. On the other hand, in more urban environments, you want to drink safe water and be drinking well. And so in our case, as a brand new entrant to the water space, we really needed to stand out and have a name that made sense both in the circles where we wanted to raise some funding in the US, as well as in the circles where we needed partnerships, like in Bangladesh and India with government officials. And so Drinkwell really helped achieve both of those goals. And it also, in terms of kind of our model, what we found was that we always had to then internally ask ourselves, are we really meeting the goal of enabling more people to be drinking well? And are the actual end users that we are here to serve benefiting day over day, week over week, month over month? And what we quickly realized is the way we initially had our go-to-market was fraught with so much friction, because you had these government officials who had these procurement laws and tenders and all kinds of red tape around really enabling them to take a risk on a new technology, because it comes back to water being such a necessity that it's risky. If you get it wrong, you might actually result in people potentially drinking something unsafe. And so we realized that we needed to actually have more of a service-based model where we removed the upfront cost barrier, and we actually put our money on the line and said, we'll upfront at no cost give you the water infrastructure, and over time, you'll pay us back as part of the revenues so that we can then quickly scale and have more people be drinking well. And so the name has really forced us to even question our own go-to-market. We've been lucky enough to even partner with great organizations like Unilever, who's actually from the Unilever Bangladesh CEO to the marketing team, all been so instrumental. And it's very easy when we have these initial meetings with these large organizations to help us really create the agenda to just say, okay, we have one very simple goal. At the end of this meeting, how do we get more people to be drinking well?
Yeah. I agree with Minhaj on that, on the first, when he mentioned that when you have these meetings with these big organizations, again, Unilever and Transfer has been instrumental to guiding us. One of the first questions they asked me, what does Maya mean? And as you know, Eric, Maya is very, very personal to me. It's my mom's name. But at the same time, when I answered him the question, it kind of embodied everything was Maya about, because Maya means compassion as well. So it kind of married into the two, that it's my mom's name, but it also means compassion. So again, in every day of our setting the pillars, are we being compassionate towards our users? Are we being understanding? There's a word called ador in Bangladesh, I guess Minhaj would know, which is Maya. And it also means that you're very, again, being compassionate. There's no English word for that word, ador, but it's kind of like Maya. So I'm very, it's very personal to me, but also it embodied that entire meaning of, being compassionate. And I think you asked about, like, does it kind of mean anything to our organization style? Yes, it does, because everyone who joins Maya as well, they're deeply motivated about the passion or the impact that we are trying to create underlying. And then everyone also is a user of Maya from our company. So it just, we keep evolving in that way. So it goes both ways in the name, capturing both the business side and the passionate side, I guess.
Great, Joanna or Geoff?
Yeah, I was just going to say that mine's a quick answer. We started HappyTap, the name as a kind of a joke, like a placeholder, but then it stuck because we really wanted to make hand washing fun, and happy is easy to understand. And what it says about our business, I hope that it says that we're focused on this issue, this hand washing issue, but also that we have fun with our work. And I hope someday one of our team members names a child HappyTap, just so that we can be in both clubs.
For Kasha, we couldn't think of a name for the company. We tried on many different ideas, and then, just Kasha came up, and it stuck. And the idea for Kasha really came together when I was pregnant with my second child, my first daughter. And so really Kasha was the impetus to that. And I think having a daughter really made me think about women and girls around the world. And it really, I do think it says a lot about our company as well. You know, this company, Kasha, does not exist only to make money. We, of course, want to continue to grow and scale and become more profitable and expand around the world. But it exists because we want to make sure that women and girls are never blocked from living their best lives. And that's integral to our company, it's integral to our name, and it's deeply personal to me as the founder and the CEO.
Yeah, now in a last speed round, unfortunately, we're almost out of time. What advice do you have for others viewing who have an idea and who have a background in business or investment and want to bring it to bear on some of these intractable issues?
So my business is in technology, and I've worked in many different roles throughout my career. For a long time, I thought, you know, I don't really have much of a career path because I've done so many different types of jobs. But really, it's all come in handy when I look back. I think one of the threads that I've followed throughout my career is really go where what inspires you. Just what's pulling you, what's inspiring you, you should go in that direction. And I think really it comes down to, even if you fail, you will learn more than perhaps what you're doing now. And that really made me question, is this the right thing to do?
Yeah, and for me, again, very similar to Joanna in the sense that we are a tech-enabled company. We invest a lot in, you know, AI and natural language understanding. So for me, it's what I would say, that obviously believing in your, you know, product, don't let that stigma or, you know, the social stigma that's around you. Like, is it harder for women, or is it harder that, you know, it's, I mean, if you ask me, it's not. If your product speaks for itself, if you have traction, if you have the product market fit, your product will speak for itself. But you also have to make sure that it's one of those, particularly for our region, there's so much population, for like 160 million population for Bangladesh, and we're expanding in the region. Also having the understanding how you use technology to scale. So if you have that and your product's working, then I think my advice to whoever is interested in this space is, you know, try and build something for the mass, which can scale, and the product, and then obviously the product will speak for itself.
I would add on, thanks, Ivy. I think that those are great points. I would add that, I mean, I definitely think entrepreneurship should be encouraged. There's so much latent potential, I think, in the countries that we work in South Asia and Southeast Asia. But we also have to keep in mind that there are a few limits to what small, really scrappy, even innovative startups can achieve. You know, if we want to see large-scale, system-level change in public health, we need partners and we need collaborative efforts. So keep in mind, like, I appreciate what Minhaj said about finding the mojo and working with government. I think that's a great point, because I think that's when we can start to insert into pipelines for greater scale. We also need to keep in mind that if we've got experience in OECD-type countries with investment or business, then obviously, like, we can't base our expectations on the experience from those countries. Everything's different. We've talked about that a little bit. Some things are harder and some things are a bit slower, but staying focused, real focused, I think, is a good piece of advice for any entrepreneur to keep in mind.
Yeah, I would say it's super important to write your values in pen and your tactics in pencil. I think if anything, 2020 has taught us the world can change so dramatically, and it's really easy to lose your sense of center. And so if it wasn't for the fact that we really protected our values of really putting the customer first, of really focusing on enabling people to drink well, we would feel really lost in terms of how to go from an environment where you could really travel and do all kinds of infrastructure work to where you couldn't do any of that. So it's really important to kind of ring fence the values and stay true to them, and really kind of hold yourself accountable to them as the world changes.
Thank you all very much. This is fascinating, and I'm so grateful we've had a chance to learn about and celebrate your work. I think Minhaj had a good point to end on there. 2020 has not been a parade of great news, but to see that your companies are out there trying to improve people's lives and health is a really powerful message, and I'm glad we've had a chance to share it. Back to you, Mallika.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Eric. And with that, we wrap up today's Sustainable Business Briefing, Impact Through Entrepreneurship. And I hope you enjoyed those conversations as much as I did. Thank you to all our speakers for their time and insights, and to you, our audience, for joining us. I'd also like to thank EY for making this event possible. All of the entrepreneurs we spoke with today have received support from Transform, which is a collaboration between Unilever, EY, and the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office that uses the power of inclusive markets to deliver impactful goods and services to low-income communities in sub-Saharan Africa and also in Asia. Please follow us at Bloomberg Live and check out our website, bloomberglive.com, to find out more about our events. We do have a pretty packed calendar right through to the end of the year, and we'd love you to join us. We hope you can join us for the next Bloomberg Sustainable Business Briefing on October 7th, and that's going to focus on accelerating climate action. So make a note of that and do join us. I'm Mallika Kapur. On behalf of the entire team at Bloomberg Live, thank you for joining us, and stay well.